set up our grids in Houdini. If you missed the last video on Photoshop about setting up your orthographic reference views, go ahead and check that video out. There should be a link down in the description. But for now, we're going to take those images, those quick drawings that we did in Photoshop, we're going to put them into Houdini so that we can model from them. And this is going to assume that you really know nothing about Houdini, so we're going to kind of cover some basic like navigation as well. So in Houdini, pretty simple. We're actually not going to be using most of this stuff up here. We're actually going to just be using the tab key to add things to our network view. Our network view is this area down here. Our 3D view is this place over here. And then our parameters are over here. So we're really just going to be working with those three, putting the mouse over them, and then pressing tab to bring up this menu right here. You do want to make sure that you have your mouse in the right place, because there is a difference between putting your mouse over here and pressing tab versus putting your mouse over here and pressing tab. So just be aware of that. You get slightly different options, and when you place stuff down, you're going to get a slightly different set of controls. So, moving on, I'm going to go ahead and collapse this little bit down here. We don't need this animation timeline, so we'll hide that. And we also want to set this up. We're going to save a project, not just the file, but we're going to save a project. So I'm going to go to File, and we're going to go to New Project. And I've already created a project for this, so I'm actually not going to save my project, but I'll show you the steps that you're going to want to go through with this. I'm going to name the project, call this ship, whatever name you want to give it. We're also going to give it a location, so click on this little arrow here. I'm going to put this inside of here and inside the Houdini projects, and we'll just accept that, and that'll give it the file path of where we want it to go. Next, we want to select the folders that it's going to create. It's going to create all these folders for us. We don't want all these. Like, we're really only going to use geometry. We're going to use potentially Houdini digital assets. We're not going to be making any simulations with this. We're not going to be exporting Alembic with this. We will need textures, and we will need renders, because we're going to be adding textures especially, and potentially rendering it out. We're not going to need flipbooks since we're not animating it. We're not going to need scripts, composites, audio, videos, or desktops. So we can kind of simplify it and keep it a little bit cleaner by telling it to create just the folders that we actually need. So then you'll click Accept down there. I'm just going to click Cancel because, again, I've already created mine. Then I'm going to go to File, and you'll want to do this every time that you open Houdini, especially if you're working on like a workstation at a lab or any computer that is shared by multiple people. But we're going to go to Set Project, and you want to select the project that you just made. And you want to do this, again, every time you open Houdini. Even if you're on your own computer, it's a good idea to check and make sure that the correct project is open. Since Houdini links in assets, it doesn't actually import them and embed them as part of the file. So image textures, for instance, if you move your geometry file without also moving all of the textures and stuff associated with it, then those links will break and your textures won't show up anymore. So it's really important to keep all that stuff in one folder. And then if you're moving from computer to computer, or you're working again like in a shared like network space, it's super important to keep all that stuff together in that one folder and take the whole folder with you if you're moving to a different computer to use. So we've got that. We'll quickly go over navigation in the 3D viewport. So holding the Alt key on Windows or Option on a Mac, and left click and drag will give you this kind of rotation. Middle mouse click and drag will let you pan around like this, and then right click and drag will let you zoom in and out. So that's the basic rotation for there. And then inside of the network view, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just that you can use only right click to zoom in and out, and middle mouse click to pan back and forth. So you'll see me kind of moving around in there. We can't rotate because it's a flat kind of 2D view of our network over here. Now that we're looking at our network, let's go ahead and create some nodes. So I'm going to press Tab, and we're going to be putting all of this in a geometry node. It's always good to start with just an empty geometry node to add all your stuff to, rather than starting with like a tube or a basic grid or something like that. So we're going to create an empty geometry node. We'll call it Grids. Press Enter. And then you can either double click on it, or with this node selected, you can press I on the keyboard and it will dive in. We can see up here now, it'll kind of give us a little breadcrumb of what, how many levels in we are here. Right now we're on the objects panel, and we're in grid, so this kind of tells us where we are. If I press U on the keyboard, now it jumps back out, so now we're just in the object view, kind of the main object view, and you'll probably end up with a whole bunch of different geometry objects as you create a scene. But I'm going to press I again to dive back in here, and we're going to create a grid, so we can press a tab, and just type in what you want, which in this case is a grid, press enter to accept it, and then we're going to change the properties of this. So this is actually going to be our top view when we're done. So we create the top view. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as is. We can assume that this is about 10 meters, so each one of these units is a meter. And so at 10 meters, that seems all right. Like a 30-foot ship is a little bit small, but that's okay for our purposes here. Go ahead and set these to 2 each. And then I also want to give this some UV, so I'm going to give it a UV project node. And I'm not going to be able to see this actually do anything, so I'm also going to create a UV quick shade. And the UV quick shade will let me visualize that it's adding this UV grid to it and that the UVs are working. As you create nodes, it's really important to remember to set your display flag. Right now, the blue highlight on this one tells us that that's the one that's currently being displayed. We can have one node selected, which is currently the UV quick shade is selected, but a different node is displayed. It's really handy to be able to use that to change things at different points in the network and see how it affects stuff. So you could keep the last node displayed, but be changing the first node and see if that's creating the effects that you want as you change the first node. So in this case, I'm just going to set the display flag for UV quick shade, and we can see now that we've got this whole grid here. Pretty handy. It is going the wrong way, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this because we don't need the quick shade, and then I'm just going to start adding some transform nodes for the side and the front. So there's first this transform node for the front. We're going to call this front or side view, and we're going to rotate this. We want it to kind of face towards the side, so we're going to rotate it around the z-axis. And if you've never used 3D before, this might be a little bit confusing. Which one of these is z? Well, they're in alphabetical order. They're always in alphabetical order, so that's why they didn't bother labeling these. Regardless of what 3D application you use, these are pretty much always going to be in alphabetical order. So it's going to be translate x, y, z, rotate x, y, z, scale x, y, z, so on and so forth. So in this case, we want to rotate it around the z, and we can see our little map here, a little navigation. We can also see a little kind of compass down here telling us which way is which. And in most 3D software, z is kind of positive, z should be forward. So that's where we want the front of the ship to be, is on this side here with this positive z axis. So we're going to rotate this around z to get it so it's facing kind of forward on the x-axis, since this is our side view. So we're going to say x, y, z, and we're going to rotate this 90 degrees. Now, I'm not actually seeing this. We need to connect our node network here. So I'm going to click and drag a wire from this UV project out to the side view, and then I'm going to set my display flag. So now we can see that it's changing it like that. Now, let's go ahead and add another transform node. And that just here. Same thing, we can drag our wire in. I'm going to name this one, and also go ahead and set its display flag. So we'll name this the front view. And we want this one to rotate so that it's facing forward. So we want it to be facing forward in the z-axis. I'm going to rotate it around the x. So in the rotate, we're going to type in the x area, and we're just going to type in 90. Now it's facing forward there. Pretty handy. Now we need to go ahead and create the groups that this is going to use for its materials. And then we'll create our materials as well. So groups are a really, really handy feature in Houdini, and really groups are what enable Houdini to make all this procedural stuff that you can then change and edit quickly later without having any destruction to your mesh. It's the non-destructive editing. So we're going to be using some groups to just select these polygons through the flow, and then we'll apply materials to them. So I'm going to add a group right here, and we're going to click on the output of that side view. And the group, I'm going to name the group to $OS, and what that'll do is just pull the name of the node from here. So this will be our side group. And this $OS will basically just pull that node name. So we have a node name and a group name. I want to make sure that base group is enabled. If it's not going to group the things that we want. Let's go ahead and set the visibility to the side view here. And we've got this little tiny button here. This looks like a square. It says display group and attribute list. I'm going to click on that. And it should display as is, but you can also check this little gear here and make sure that you're in the right thing. And right now it's matching selection type. In this case, we're on a group that's a primitive, so it's showing our primitives. But you'll notice if we jump down to like points or edges, it's not going to show any groups. So make sure that you're on the right group type if you're not seeing the group that you think should be created. As we mouse over this, we can see that it highlights that blue. So basically it's highlighted this primitive blue, and when we apply our material, it's going to be applying it to that. Speaking of which, I'm going to go ahead and just create my material here, just so that we have it ready to go. We're just going to append that there, and we're going to name this side mat. Now we'll be adding the material a little bit later, but I can go ahead and set my group since that's already created. Now what I'm going to do is take these two, and I'm just going to Alt-click and drag and stick them underneath this one. Now I want to disconnect these from the side view. So hold the Y key on the keyboard, and we can just drag and cut that wire. I'm going to drag a new wire down from here. And let's go ahead and rename these. So this is no longer side group. This is going to be top group. And then this is going to be side material. Oh, it's front mat, or top mat. Sorry. That's our top mat. And then here, instead of the group, the side group, we're going to be changing that to use top group. You'll notice I only get the one drop down here. And the reason is that we've only got the flow of information from this node to this node. There's only been one group created. Our side group is over here. So from here, unless we connect these together like that, then we're not going to see that group. So let's go ahead and make sure that those are connected like that. And then finally, I'm just going to select them both and Alt-click and drag again like this. Again, let's disconnect, holding the Y key, dragging across it, and then connect these two. So just drag that wire from the output to front view into this group. Let's go ahead and rename this group. So this is going to be front group. And then our material is going to be named front mat, and the group that we're going to use here. And we want to always make sure to delete these, because if you start adding multiple groups, it'll apply that material to multiple groups. So we want to make sure that we have just the one. So this is going to be front group. All right, then we can actually bring all of these together with a merge node. So I'm going to select merge here. And I'm just going to select, you can drag a box around all of these, and then drag from one to the merge node, and it will actually connect all three into the merge node. If I hit merge, now we can see that we've got all three polygons here, and we also get all three groups. And as I mouse over each group, we have our top group, side group, and our front group, and it will kind of highlight each of those polygons in turn. All right, so finally we need to actually create the materials that are going to get linked into this. So to do that, we're going to need to jump over to the material palette. So it's this tab right here. So this is our object, or basically our object menu will show us, any of these views, but we're going to jump into material palette. So here in material palette, you want to scroll through this list of materials. I'm going to scroll all the way down here to constant. And the constant shader basically just ignores lighting, shadows, all that kind of stuff, so that it will just display a constant visual. It won't kind of get any lighter or darker. And we want this to be always visible for our materials, because we don't want to have to look through like shadows and lighting and all that stuff. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and create a constant. We'll create one, we'll call it side mat. Press enter. We'll add our materials to this as well. So I'm going to go to the surface tab. And you'll notice there's a surface tab here, which we're currently on, surface, place, and environment. And there's actually a surface tab up here at the top under or next to OpenGL. And that's the surface that we want to jump to. So surface tab up here. this gives us a couple of options for color and adding a color map. And what we're going to be adding is a color map, any texture or texture image you can think of as a map. So we're going to click this little arrow right here. I'm going to jump into our text folder, and we've got these 3 views that I've already put into the texture folder of our project. So dropship front, side, and top. And for this one, this is going to be our side material, so we'll go ahead and click accept, and it will bring in that dropship side material. So let's go ahead and create another constant. So I'm going to drag that over here. We'll click on it, name this top view, and I'll go ahead and create one more for front before we add our images. I think I named this front view instead of matte or top view. Let's name it top matte just to be consistent. All right, so with this one selected, again, go to surface. We're gonna again use this little arrow here to select our top picture. From the front matte, we're gonna again go to surface and select this little arrow and go to front.png and click accept. So now we can jump back out here, back to our main view. Now you'll notice we were on this tab over here on the left, and it no longer says object, it says matte. That's fine. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And we're actually going to see our little material network here, but we also have this little drop-down list that we can go to. So we've got a bunch of different options to go to, and in this case we want to go back to object because that's what we were working on before. And we'll just need to dive into grids again. For each of these material nodes here, we're going to bring up that material shader that we just created. So here under material on the side, I'm going to go ahead and click this little browser, expand out the materials, and add my side matte. Click accept. I'm just going to click visualize, make sure that we're seeing just that one. Looks good. And sometimes you have to turn these on and off a couple of times or it won't show. So go ahead and also turn off our groups here. So on the top matte, we'll go ahead and select that one and set our top material shader that we just created, and finally on front matte, we'll go ahead and set the front material shader that we just created. So now we've got each of these. I'm going to set the visibility there, so we're seeing the top and we're seeing the front. If I look at the merge, we're seeing all 3 together. So everything is displaying. We just need to make sure that they're displaying the correct direction. Right now the side view is pointing down, the top view is pointing backwards, and the front view is upside down. So we're going to make sure that these are all pointing the correct way. So we're going to add another transform node for each of these. And we're just going to add a second one after, rather than using the original transform, we'll just create a new one. So this one needs to rotate it basically around this x-axis, but we want to make sure that that's working. So a quick way to check and make sure that that's working is to middle mouse click and drag up here. So yes, it is rotating around the x-axis. Perfect. So if you middle mouse click and drag, you can actually see that this gives you a lot of control. So we can do 1 unit at a time, 1/10 of a unit at a time, hundredths, and then all the way down to millionths. And it's really easy to control a rotation like this, but we're not using that. We're just going to go ahead and type in -90. Looks like it needs to rotate backwards. Yep. So -90 there. For our top view, we'll add another transform in here. So for the top view, we'll this looks like it needs to rotate around the y-axis. So y-axis, we're going to rotate that 180. So it's flipped around completely like that, which is great. So finally we need to rotate this front view around its z-axis. So we're going to add yet another front view here, or yet another transform, and this is going to rotate that front view around the z-axis. So in the z, on this, let's go ahead and rotate this 180 so it can kind of completely flips it upside down. All right, so now we've got our front, side, and top view of our ship. As the front lines up with the top, the side lines up with the front, and the top and the front also line up. So last thing that we're going to do with this, there's a couple of different things that you can do. One is to transform these to push them further away from your modeling area. which is something that I like to do in Maya because you can just kind of push them really, really far away. The problem is that you can't actually see them then in your 3D view, which I guess is up to personal preference. So here we'll go ahead and look at a way to do each one of those. So for transform, what I'm going to do is just transform it. In this case, we're looking at the side view, so I'm going to transform it in the negative x. So translate negative x. We're just going to move it further away. So we can move it kind of out of our view like this, so we don't see it anymore. And then here in the view panel, I can hold spacebar and press 4 on the keyboard, and we'll see our orthographic view. And we'll see that image plane as if it's right in front of us without any change in size, because it's still the same size, and without any perspective distortion, it's not going to get smaller. And that's what an orthographic view does, is it just shows us the flat view. We can see each of our views by holding spacebar. So spacebar in 3 for front, spacebar in 2 for top, and spacebar 1 for our 3D. And actually spacebar 5 will show us our UV map, which is kind of handy, but for now we'll just leave it there. So that's one method, is I like to move stuff further away. That way I can see it on the orthographic views, but it doesn't interfere with my ability to see things in the modeling area. Another way is to set the opacity. So if you do like to see these in the actual 3D viewport, which can be handy, you can actually just change the opacity of these without kind of altering the position. So we always see them even in 3D view. And to do that, we're going to add an attribute wrangle. So I'm going to press tab, type in wrangle, and we'll click that right there, set our display flag. With attribute wrangle, what we can do is put in an expression. So we're going to add a little bit of vex here. And what I'm going to put in is A, or at, capital A for alpha. So at alpha with capital A equals, and then we're going to put in a string here. So we're going to put in a channel, and we're going to name it with a string. So we're going to type in ch for channel, and then in parentheses we can type in the channel name. And to make it a word, we're going to put quotes so that it'll be what's called a string. So in programming languages, you have strings and you have numeric operators. In this case, we want to have it like a text string, so we're going to put it in quotes. Numeric operators don't go in quotes, but strings typically do. So here, we'll go ahead and name this opacity. And then at the very end, we're going to put a semicolon just to end that expression. Now I'm going to click out of there. And it disappeared, but that's okay, because if we click this little button right here, it creates spare parameters. So this little button will basically create a slider for that channel that we just specified. And if I drag this little slider around, now we can see that we can control the opacity of those at any time. Super handy feature, and just a little bit of scripting. We're basically just assigning a variable and then making a slider for it. So there's really nothing too complicated there. So we can kind of change our opacity at any time. You can use that even in conjunction with moving these things around. So that's it for setting up your grids. In the next video, we can start modeling based on these grids. So I will see you in the next video.